Merci. I guess that's right. Whatever Huage said is typically right. If not, it's my fault to not have briefed him whatsoever. So welcome. This is on securing, minimizing, hardening Liferay. I saved myself from bringing some hats, some black hats, some white hat, gray hat, whatever. So this is called the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll mainly stay on the productive side, where I'd like to tell you about things that I have seen in production, in forums, in like just questioning, in system admin practices. I'm doing system admin trainings, and there we cover quite a bit of this. And as I told you before, I would like you to share your experiences as well, because there's nothing as good as horror stories, as experiences of others to learn what to do better next time and on your own. Right? So if you see anything that reminds you of something that will help others avoid the same mistakes, just step in, and I might just throw a microphone at you, and I'll be very much interested in getting your experience. Security, hardening, and so on is not an end by itself. If it would be as simple as setting the checkbox, yes, I'd like this installation secure and I'd like this installation hardened, that would be fine. Actually, there is a way to do that. The safest, securest platform that you can have, well, just do a static HTML export of everything, put that on your web server, just serve static content, nothing ever changeable. That's safe, that's secure. You still can get a denial of service attack, so that your network is not enough. That is kind of a security issue. Well, hardening would give you more bandwidth. But, well, the safest system, as I say, is something that you cannot change anything in. Naturally, you don't want that. That's not why you have Liferay. So let's see. Some of you might recognize this image because I've used this image in an illustration on a series of blog posts. Some of these tips and tricks and stories that I share here are already available on the blog. The slides don't give you the nitty-gritty detail of everything, but you can already read a lot of these stories on the blog. This session will be recorded, and I will continue with the blog series with more ideas, especially if you share more of them. So just look at my blog, and you will find some. Some of the pet peeves, the things that I see are related to the platform. The platform infrastructure is not even Liferay. Liferay runs on all kinds of things, on databases. I think there's around 10 databases that we're compatible with, on application servers, WebSphere, WebLogic, Tomcat, JBoss, Glassfish, whatever. Quick show of hands. Who here is using Tomcat? Who is using JBoss? WebSphere? WebLogic? Glassfish? Any other? Okay, I found them all. Now, when we come to security, there is one thing that I would like to recommend in terms of the application server. There is exactly one application server that is the securest, safest for you. Those of you who showed up their hands with Tomcat, it probably is for a good reason that you chose Tomcat. For you, I do recommend use Tomcat. For you, that's the safest one. Those of you that showed up for WebSphere, for example, you probably chose that because you know how to administer WebSphere, right? So if you don't, well, you're kind of between a rock and a hard place. But if there is a good reason for you to choose WebSphere because you know how to maintain that platform, use WebSphere. That is your safest one. There is no way I'm going to tell any WebLogic user, use Tomcat, because if the server breaks down, just hardware failure, recovering from that will be a disaster. So if you know how to operate your platform, that's the safest platform that you can run on, not any particular product. So Tomcat for the Tomcat users, WebSphere for the WebSphere users, and so on. And that's your app server. I missed stepping in front. Nevertheless, most of you were on Tomcat, and on Tomcat we can see quite a lot of things very easy. There's the one thing that I always see on Tomcat. Tomcat by default is running on port 8080, and you want a web server to run on port 80. On Unix, you need to be root in order to listen to port 80, which means everywhere, all over the forums, you see that's the way to start Tomcat, right? So change it to listen on port 80 and then start it as root. Bad idea. Does anybody do that, actually run Tomcat as root? I guess nobody will show up, right? Well, I don't want anybody to stick out with that. So why is that a bad idea? If there is any security issue in anything, then you will run as root. That is, you have all of the permissions on the server. You don't want that. Never run any front-facing server, any web-facing server as root. That's just basic things. There is a startup script in the blogs that you can use in case you are on Linux, but actually, it's part of your platform on Windows. You should run as an unprivileged user on Linux, on Macs, on Solaris, whatever platform you're running on. Just keep that in mind. And there is Apache. Use Apache for actually handling the front end, port 80 or port 443 for the HTTPS stuff. There's a little bit coming in the end or a bit later during this presentation to actually let you know a little bit more about coupling Apache in front and then Tomcat in the back. Not only for security reasons, but also for some other quick fix reasons. This is a very good idea to have some platform in front. Be it Apache, be it Nginx, I don't care what the front end is. I'll just use Apache as generic term for a front-facing web server, right? Now, as we are at the platform, quick question, can anybody tell me what these strings have in common? This is a quite nasty attack that I recently came across. Nobody? So they all share the same hash value. If you hash them, they're all ending up in the same hash. Not quite obvious, I guess. Took me a while. Actually, I didn't figure it out as well. Why might that be a problem? Well, for example, in Tomcat, your parameters will be stored in a hash map, which means a hash map is based on the hash values of parameters in case you have collisions that an attacker might actually willingly cause. You are at a linear lookup time. Actually, it's not linear, it's exponential, and there are a few time values. If you have 100 of these parameters, that takes 0.33 seconds to parse them. Tomcat's default, and that's the greenish line in there, is it accepts 10,000 parameters per request. Parsing them actually takes 14 seconds. Like a full core, a full thread of CPU occupied for 14 seconds on some hardware. Like, okay, let's abstract from the hardware, but you'll see the order of magnitude. If you go up to 100,000, it's endless. You basically block the processor. You can configure this if 10,000 parameters are what you actually need. I doubt it, so you probably want to configure this value to be something a lot lower, which is where we get to production settings in Tomcat. Does anybody ever configure Tomcat to have production settings? Like, okay, no JSP compilation on the fly and so on, and several things. I typically see Tomcat complaining about the missing Apache runtime, performance libraries, and so on. Well, there is a production mode for Tomcat, probably for the other application servers as well. Most of them that I see are typically not running in production mode. Same thing as you should do with garbage collection and so on, but that's not security. Now let's go deeper into Liferay, into the configuration. My pet peeve, portal properties. That is, let me peek, 11,051 lines last time that I looked. Who reads or who has read portal.properties at least once? Perfect, correct answer. The others that did not show up, you should do so. Now, it's a long and boring and interesting read on the other side. What do you want to look at? And there's a few things. It's actually, well, lots of documentation in there. 11,051 lines, but most of them are documentation, commented options, explanation what you can do with them. So some of the search terms that you can actually use in there are these. Just search for password, search for encrypt. Partly, those are just parts of words. Search for encrypt and hash. If you're using Liferay 6.2, we are defaulting to hashing the passwords. You know, hashing passwords is one-way hash, it's non-reversible, and so on. But just in case your database gets loose, just in case somebody gets all of your user accounts, email addresses, and passwords, it's quite a good idea to have them one-way hashed. And it's a good idea, I'll need to peek again, to have that done with our current default PBKDF2 with HMAC SHA1/160/128,000. I cannot memorize that for whatever. So that's the default. What does that mean? The hash routines are deliberately hard to calculate. That is, it takes some time for an attacker to actually rehash all of your passwords. So if you get hold of the hashes, that actually is hard for the attacker to brute force the original passwords. Now, this is a good idea for security reasons. For performance, that's the worst thing you can do. Like when you have multiple or massively parallel logins that are coming to your portal, let's say you expect 10,000 logins a minute. This hash algorithm deliberately says, okay, we'll make it really hard to calculate the hashes, and you will have to do that as well. So for performance reasons, this totally sucks. For security reasons, it's the best thing ever. Now, what can you do if you really have multiple or massive parallel logins? My recommendation is have a single sign-on system in front. So you can scale up the single sign-on system, but stay with your Liferay, which basically does not need to do the hashing. You'll just have the single sign-on system providing all of that hashing functionality, all of the authentication, which means that Liferay doesn't even need to know your passwords. The single sign-on system has your passwords. Liferay just knows your identity. That's it. There's nothing to lose for Liferay. It's a lot easier to protect a user database for just a single sign-on system that does nothing else but identifying you than for a full service horizontal portal that does everything and more for you. So there you are back at protecting. That's a neat way to compartmentalize. There's a few more things. If you just look for restriction, you'll find, or restrict, you'll find that you can restrict the templating engines from accessing a few things, like Liferay's service locator. I have a section in there later which mentions this again, but just very briefly, we have a templating engine in Liferay which you use within the content management system or within themes and so on. In there, you have access to the full API, especially, and it's really comfortable if you use the service locator. And if you have access to the full API, you also have access to things like user local service. What does that mean? It deals with creating user accounts. It deals with permissions on users. Well, actually, permissions are in another local service, but an identifying property of a local service is there are no permission checks. So if you have somebody introducing a template into Liferay, be sure to trust them to not do weird things with the API. One of the ways is to actually restrict certain things to make it deliberately harder for them to just use the API that you don't want to have. Now, just looking for secure will find you things like security, secure, whatever. So just this fragment, you'll find multiple things. For example, that Liferay shall require you to do HTTPS logins. So enforce logins through HTTPS. That will be one of the things, but you'll find more. It's just the regular search terms, what you should find in there. And I'll quicken up a bit with default values. There might be default values that you might want to change. There might not be. I won't tell you. I don't give you the recipe, like follow this checklist and you are safe. These are just suggestions to actually look them up. Auth from authentication, authorize, whatever you'll find in portal properties in the documentation, you'll find that as well. Default timeouts, same things. Some people actually want a session to live as long as the user has a browser open, while others say, no, this must be, like, they must be logged out after 5 minutes, and it would be wrong if they are logged in, like if they're inactive for 5 minutes, if they are still logged in. That's a security hole. You judge for yourself. Just there are options to set yourself. In the Servlet filters, you'll find all of the supported single sign-on systems, the ones that Liferay provides. Now, if you don't want anybody to mimic a single sign-on system that you don't know of, just deactivate them there. If you're using CAS, deactivate Shibboleth, for example. Do you allow strangers to register an account on your portal? Or you can look for a stranger or for... No, wait. Oh, sorry, that's on this one. Do you allow everybody to create an account like we do on Liferay.com? We want you to create an account on Liferay.com. So for us, yes, we set that to true. On a company intranet, you don't want create yourself an account and you're in somewhere on your portal. Just judge for yourself. And then I have another section on HTTPS a bit later. So that shall be all that I have about portal properties. Read that file, 11,000 lines. You can page down through some of the pages, but it really makes sense to know this. I have learned so much about Liferay, security-wise, functionality-wise, by just finding all of the options in there. Now, content and plugins. Is anybody here blogging on Liferay.com other than me? So we do trust our authors to blog, we trust our community to write blog articles on Liferay.com. You might know Liferay's HTML editor, which is CKEdit, and that has a neat source button, so you can enter all kinds of scripting and inject all kinds of stuff, right? So yes, we trust you enough to provide content, but we don't trust you enough to not write nasty content. And actually, they don't trust me enough to not write nasty content, like script attacks and so on. So there is a plugin, anti-SAMI, which basically just filters out the non-whitelisted stuff following the OWASP recommendations. It's a very good idea if you don't fully trust your content authors to have that deployed. Because now, well, even though I have the source button, I'm not allowed to upload any script files. I think any script files other than GitHub, GISTs, that's what we particularly whitelisted. There's not even embedding of YouTube videos. That doesn't work in the blogs. Annoyingly, we might add that and specifically whitelist that, but that's just the default. Do you trust your application developers? Something else, not about the platform, but about the people that are working for you. Do you trust them? There is something, even third party, if you get something from the marketplace, you can enforce them to run in a sandbox. It's Java, after all. We have a security manager. You can activate that security manager and enforce them to run in that security manager. If you're downloading an app from Marketplace, ask yourself, why does this not run in a security manager? Do I have the source code? Can I review that code? By the way, code review is quite a good idea, even for your own team. If not for security, then for code quality reasons. But security is what I'm talking about today. So enforce the sandbox is one of the ways. And there we are again. Do you trust your template editors? A free marker template, a velocity template, is basically an extended Java class. Even though you might restrict several variables, there are always ways that you can make creative use of templates that, in my eyes, you should really limit the ability to edit templates to trusted personnel. Maybe even have code reviews there. So I don't go more into details in this because that will be very technical and probably take 5 minutes out of this to demonstrate something. But just be aware, it's like uploading Java code. That's to edit a free marker template. Now, one of the other blog posts that I recently wrote, and I'm quite happy to say this made a difference because Service Pack 12 of Enterprise Edition 6.2 will solve this problem, is monitoring conflicts. If you are uploading a plugin, a hook, with a JSP, overriding one of Liferay's UIs, that's one of the things that actually works, then, well, you can introduce your own JSP. Introduce a second hook, overriding the same JSP. This is your reaction, and you'll find the blog post with this in here. Let me demonstrate this. Has anybody ever done that? So is everybody already, oh yeah, I see. Okay, what happens? Let's say Liferay's original version is this one. It's called Vue.jsp. So now you deploy hook number 1, which means the original version is renamed to view.portal.jsp, and the hooks version actually is stepping in as the old view.jsp. Now you might refer from Vue.jsp, you might refer to the view.portal.jsp. You know that it's being renamed to just this name. So you can include the original in yours. Now, what happens when we introduce a second hook? This. So we'll do exactly the same thing again. And now, well, let's say you include that original file again, but it's not our original version, it's this hook 1's version. Now let's make it a bit more nasty. I'll now undeploy any hook. Let's say I'll even undeploy the first hook, hook number 1. Whoops, sorry, I missed that. This is what happens when I undeploy hook number 1, which means I have the original hook 1 implementation of my overwritten JSP in there, and it tries to include a file that is not there anymore. So this will break. Now let's break it further. Let's now undeploy hook number 2. So now your portal is severely damaged and you are really missing one of the original contents. So that, okay. Now that really sucks, it's gone. You don't want that. And lucky enough, there's help. Service Pack 12, as far as I expect, will solve this. You'll have to willingly switch it on. There's an option for it. But I think this has been triggered by a blog post which fixes it already. There's an X plugin that you can download which will prohibit deploying another JSP twice. So it will just refuse to deploy your second hook that does exactly this. So quite nice. With OSGI, like in Liferay 7, the promise is everything will be better. However, I have heard that, at least as of today, this problem will still be the same. Overriding core JSPs will have the same problem. So I hope that this is now fixed once and forever, that we at least block the deployment of the plugin, and yeah, we'll deal with it. Now, permissions. I've had some of the permissions already on the application level, on the operating system level. That is, you don't want to run as root. And again, I would also say you don't want to have write permissions to the web application folder and to several other folders as you want to have in a deployment environment. What does that mean? It's very easy if somebody needs to administer your portal to give them administrator access. Administrator means that you can do everything on the whole portal. Yeah, very convenient. Convenience and security are two different sides of the world, not even of a coin, but it's like literally far outside. What people can do is just use everything you have, like the app manager, that is, they can install any kind of plugin that they want. My favorite example is fileexplorer.war. So just some application that gives you access to the whole file system that Liferay has access to. So is that what you want? Well, decide for yourself, but Liferay has a very flexible permissioning system. You can do your own administrator roles and provide that administrator role with very fine-grained permissions. For example, to just go, which is the next one, to just have access to user management, but not to application management, for example. There's another neat thing in Liferay that is portal instances. Who here is working with portal instances? Only a few, okay. There is one security reason to work with portal instances. That is, if you have, typically you just have the very first instance there, the one that I have on top, liferay.com, and if you create a second one, you'll need a virtual host name and so on. Now, if you leave the very first instance as your administrative instance, and the second one to the end user feels like a totally new portal with one difference. Control panel on the first instance, on the default instance, looks like you are used to it. That's the control panel for Liferay. But look at the marked places when I just forward to the next one. In your second instance, you won't have access to things like server administration. I'll go back once more. You won't have access to server administration, garbage collection, reindexing, and so on. You won't have access to the app manager to install new components, the marketplace store, and so on. So just providing administrative access on the second instance does not give you the full power over everything. So that's one of the things to just keep access of people that you might or might not trust. Now let me quickly go back to the web server. Things that I constantly see, mod proxy, AJP, mod JK. My favorite is mod JK, but that's just because I'm used to it. There is a communication channel between the web server and, for example, Tomcat. Pardon to those that don't use Tomcat, I'll just keep picking on Tomcat because that's the most common one and the one that I'm typically dealing with. Like communicating with Tomcat on HTTP means we will lose some information. If I have an HTTPS connection to Apache, and Apache forwards on HTTP to Tomcat, Tomcat will think, nothing else provided, oh, this was an HTTP connection, and generate HTTP links, non-secure. So you can fix that, but you'll have to fix it if you forward on HTTP. If you forward on AJP, it will contain all of that information. Same with the original host name. Tomcat will think that Apache originates all of Tomcat's requests, because it does to Tomcat. So you can forward that information, but you'll need to do that on HTTP. AJP has it. There are several people that absolutely do not like AJP because it's not fully spec'd and fully fleshed out in the specification. So it's implementation detailed and so on. I haven't had any bad experience with it, but, well, judge for yourself. Just know that you will have to do certain things. HTTPS, the HTTPS encryption algorithm du jour. After all of these different security things that I have seen in the last time, OpenSSL with problems, encryption algorithms with problems, it's a very good idea to check your web server, the web server's algorithms that it's offering frequently. I would say every time you hear some report on SSL, some report on NSA, GCHQ, or whatever they broke that day or they suspect that day. There is a tool on, I think it's sslabs.com, which rates your SSL implementation. And you don't want to get an F from them. That's like the worst thing. It's an American tool, so it goes A to F. You want your algorithms to be balanced. You don't want any any insecure encryption algorithms. My favorite one is an encryption algorithm that was introduced with the original SSL implementation. I can never remember the exact name, but I think it was plain or text or whatever, so it's unencrypted. So you can have an HTTPS connection that actually is unencrypted, because that's one of the ciphers. You can also enforce HTTP. HSTS is a good search term for searching for this. This means you tell the browser to never, ever contact this site again on HTTP. Of course, if your HTTPS then breaks, you will have locked yourself out. Never, ever, ever is what you see here with a max age that's 1 year in seconds. So I'll skip this in order to make up some time. Remember that I told you to actually listen to Huage on the Elk stack, on how to use New Relic and how to do stuff. You can get quite some insight, even security-wise, when you keep an eye on the logs, on the diagrams, on the dashboards. One of the stories that I've heard on one of the recent conferences is a German internet provider got hacked. Well, their users got hacked by a massively distributed password brute force attack. Their intrusion detection systems were looking for repeated tries on the same username. What the system did was they just figured out millions of valid email addresses and then tried each email address once with well-known passwords. And then they tried the other email address. And then a week later, they came back to the first email address. They've had significant success hacking, like really hacking with attempts every week because they had so many addresses. So had they monitored the failed login attempts per day, they would have seen that suddenly they bumped because over the day it was visible, but they did not monitor that one. They did log out the people after 3 login attempts, but with 3 login attempts over 3 weeks, nobody was ever logged out. So quite a neat attack. And you might see that when you keep an eye on your dashboard on New Relic, on the on the events that you actually generate. Same thing, we do provide another dashboard for you, formerly used, or it formerly was named Liferay Cloud Services. Now it's named Liferay Connected Services. Very easy to install. Install a plugin, get an account on Connected Services, and you will have a dashboard which tells you, hey, you need a few more updates, especially if you're on Enterprise Edition. This is your timing, your portal utilization, and so on. And with that, I took a bit longer than I actually wanted. Nobody interrupted me by saying, yes, I know that. And I wanted to say, discuss. I want your horror stories. We might have time for one horror story. If somebody really has something to share, I'd be very interested in it. Otherwise, you will find me during today and the next day somewhere here. So please come by and share. I'll anonymize everything if I am allowed to publish it, and everybody shall profit from this. So is there anybody who has some experience? Have you been hacked, or have you seen a very creative attack? Or just even a plain attack that everybody always does? Who has never seen an attack on their system? Okay, so correct answer. I think you all have seen an attack on your system. If somebody would have said, I have never seen an attack on my system, I would have said, okay, look better. Like, look at it. Systems are attacked ever, like always, all day, all night. Okay, please share your experiences, and with that, I think I'm done, and well, thank you for your attention.